My name is Nat, and welcome to Thursday's webinars. Every Thursday, I deliver educational entertainment to help you better understand your noggin. Today, we're going to be looking at ADHD in education, predominantly looking at 6+ education, just because I feel it's less catered for. I support people who are neurodivergent every single day. I am neurodivergent myself, so I've got that lovely lived experience. Also, have a lovely master's in neuroscience. As of a few weeks ago, an official TEDx speaker. You are in good, capable hands, or at least I would say so. But feel free to question me, hold me to account, anything you agree or disagree with, always welcomed to be challenged. Today, we are predominantly focusing on ADHD. However, a lot of the things we're going to mention today have a strong overlaps with autism, because both of these are considered neurodevelopmental conditions or neurological, where dyslexia and dyspraxia are more specific learning difficulties, meaning that where they have difficulties in a particular area in life or education, autism and ADHD set everything. As I said, here's a picture of me and the BBC for credibility reasons, just so you see, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. You are very welcome to add me on LinkedIn. Now for the bit I really want to get onto, my TED Talk. Those of you who came last week will know, if you're new, do check it out. I did a lovely TEDx talk where I talk all about how I hate labels, which is ironic considering I'm doing today's session. However, I do think labels are a useful starting point. I really would encourage you to take a look at this. So ADHD in education, I'm going to predominantly focus about 16+, just because primary schools, don't get me wrong, they're not perfect when it comes to supporting people, at least compared to post-16 education, which is like the Wild West. I want to help demystify it a little bit today. As always, I am coming from a UK perspective, but I'm hoping some of this will be transferable to the rest of the world. If it isn't, please do let me know, because there will definitely be other people that may want to tailor it to their own circumstances. Be successful today, and I sure hope to be. We're going to be looking at further education and apprenticeships. Did you know you can actually get support apprenticeships? We're going to look at higher education. That's universities, high-level degrees. We're going to look at some skills, some top tips, and finding a tutor. It's probably worth we define what we mean by ADHD. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. That is a bit of a mouthful, but essentially to have ADHD, you might have inattentive characteristics, which mean you find it difficult to focus or remain interested. You also may or may not have hyperactivity and impulsivity. Those with ADHD can often struggle with attention, and they can be quite prone to act first, think later. Some people might have a combination of both. Just so you know, ADHD comes in 3 flavors. Not everyone with ADHD has the same ADHD. If you are male, female, old, young, different backgrounds, it's also going to look very different. But this is like the bare basics. Oh, thanks, April, for sharing that TED Talk. I've always got to start off with the Old Equality Act, and I know this is a UK thing, but it's still useful. For those who do not know, in our lovely legal system, we have a bit of legislation called the Equality Act 2010, and it was a document which, guess what, came out in 2010 that had all the different protected characteristics like disability, religion, race, sexual identity, all of those things, and we squashed them together and said, hey, you better not discriminate against them, or you're going to have the law on your side or against you. It doesn't stop discrimination, but it does mean you have some rights. You may not see ADHD as a disability. That's a personal choice, but legally it is a disability. That is going to come in very handy when we're looking at support, because educational establishments have to give you support. There is a massive myth I'm going to bust today, which loads of people believe, which isn't true. Spoiler, it's that you have to have a diagnosis post-16 in order to get support. No, that used to be the case, but 2019, they said, hey, anyone can have support. That is mainly because ADHD is for life. It's not just for Christmas. ADHD is part of your DNA, it's who you are. You can't stop being ADHD. If you were diagnosed when you are 16 or under, it doesn't suddenly just vanish. That's why they changed the rules. Okay, nice. Now we have that covered, that we are qualified. Let's look at further education. Again, that just counters things like A levels, whatever T levels are. I don't know what they are. BTECs, MVQs, apprenticeships, and diplomas. The type of thing you should go to your local college for. The reason why it's good to understand this is that they do seem to care a lot about these traditional labels like ADHD. However, a lot of us will know life ain't that simple. And a lot of us will also have autism, will also have specific learning difficulties like dyslexia or dyspraxia, may also struggle with anxiety, might have depression as a result, might struggle with sleeping. It all kind of fits and molds together. Please do not rely on the system to cater for your needs. Make sure that you are your own champion. Otherwise, you may find that they look at one singular area. An example I often give people is that when I was younger, they would only give me support for autism, but wouldn't give me support for dyslexia because my dyslexia diagnosis was pre-16 and it just apparently wasn't valid anymore. And yet that is what I struggled in. It was a real faff to get support, to be honest. But this is why the more you know, the better. My first question, which hopefully I answered, do you need a formal diagnosis to get support? I think this also depends on the situation, doesn't it? All of you have said no. Yeah, in theory, no, you don't. I'm not going to lie, having a diagnosis makes life a lot easier. It means things just flow nice and fluidly. However, if you don't have a diagnosis, which, let's face it, not many of us do because they are expensive, they take a lot of time, does that mean suddenly you're not eligible? No, because under the Equality Act, if you have a condition which affects you for a long time and affects you in a significant way, you are counted as disabled. If you would count as disabled, you are entitled to reasonable adjustments. Yes, you should get support. This is a relatively new thing. Like I said, before 2019, it was a lot more difficult. Let's say you're an individual who resonates with having ADHD, not officially diagnosed, you could still get support. Interestingly, remember how I said ADHD is one diagnosis, one label to rule them all? ADHD can be broken down into many different types. We've already spoken about inattentive ADHD, hyperactive ADHD, combined ADHD, but some scholars even think there may be even more, such as ADHD that predominantly makes you anxious, the classic ADHD, which means you're more hyperactive, the inattentive ADHD, which makes you a bit more of a daydreamer, the over-focused one, which means you're more inclined to burn out, maybe a temporary lobe, which means there's actually part of the brain which has developed differently, the kind of limbic system, which is more emotional based, or maybe you have a ring of fire ADHD, which isn't like a Jimmy Cass song. It means that you have all of them all together and it's difficult. While these subtitles are genuinely unofficial, I do think it makes it easier to explain how ADHD affects you. If you just say, hey teacher, I have ADHD, what does it even mean? It could mean 101 things. The more detail you're able to supply, the more likely you're going to get accurate support. Yes, April, Johnny did sing Ring of Fire. It's a great song. Oh, April says, in terms of further education, I tried A-levels at schools, but I only did them for one term because I found the workload overwhelming and I didn't find them relevant for what I wanted to do in the future. The next term, I started college and did a BTEC. And in animation, I will say, April, different qualifications do tend to be better suited for different individuals. I do find more vocational courses tend to be better suited for neurodivergent people. But as I called in my TED talk, I should say TEDx talk, apparently I'm not allowed to say TED talk, I wanted to do more academic subjects, but they wouldn't let me do them. It can go both ways, to be honest. Have any of you heard of these terms? SEN, SEND, or SENCO? They were always flung about all over the place when I was younger, and I had no idea what they meant. I think understanding what the terms are going to be really useful, because these are the people who are going to be fighting in your corner to give you support. Different names stand for different things. They're more popular in different times, different areas, different regions. Just like ADHD has many different names. Some people call it ADHD, some people call it ADD. Previously, it was called kinetic reaction or childhood, which isn't true anymore because it affects everyone, not just children. We also have minimal brain dysfunction, which is really old. That's outdated. These labels, while they do have their own differences, they aren't used interchangeably. Amy said a defect of moral control. Yeah, absolutely. That was like the OG definition. Leo says ADHD in some cases implies generalized executive dysfunction, not just attention deficit hyperactivity. You're right, Leo. That's why the name is outdated. April says, I had a Senko in college, although I had autism rather than ADHD. Yeah, I had one of these as well. Far and few between though. What do they actually mean? SEND means special educational needs and disabilities. This is all encompassing. This is for physical disabilities and cognitive disabilities. Then you've got SEND, special educational needs. This is a lot broader. Maybe they're not a particular type of additional needs, sometimes used interchangeably. Then you've got your SENCO and SENCO. These are a special educational needs and disability coordinator. These are the people who would normally help you along your journey, or you might have a one-to-one with once a week. They will typically support people who have any of these different types of thinking. I actually prefer not to say condition these days and prefer the term profiles, because it's more about the profile characteristics that you more or less align with rather than 100% yes or no. Where did you get your first ADHD support? At 60 plus, you should already have had these conversations. If you haven't had these conversations yet with a coordinator, you really should, because there's a waiting list. Anyone at nursery? Anyone for anyone? No, no one normally picks up on ADHD that early. Primary school? Ideally, sooner the better, really. Secondary? Yeah, that's also a very common time. College? Oh, no one there. University? University do have more of that money. We pay them enough. A workplace? If you're in a good workplace, they might be able to afford an assessment, but honestly, most do not. Never. Which is depressing. Vicky says, depending on the child, mostly in primary though. My husband, however, wasn't until adulthood. I think that's a good point, Vicky. Young people are more likely to have support earlier on, where older people are likely to have it a lot later on in life. Primary school told me they thought my son is showing signs. Did they, though, do anything about it? Or did they just say, possible? It has been shown that while things like ADHD are lifelong, the sooner you get support, the better you are long term. While ADHD doesn't have a direct relation to mental health conditions, you are much more likely to have a mental health condition if you aren't supported early on. It makes sense to get support early on. He had a snap done. Special needs adaptation plan, something like that. Janet says, my diagnosis was last year, aged 51. My daughter 15 after 2 years wait on the CAMS list. Janet, what's your daughter diagnosed before you? Because normally you'll find that children are diagnosed before, and then parents will see themselves in their child and then seek a diagnosis. I just want to support others. I don't feel that I have it myself. Well, do you know, that's also completely fine, Gail. After me, but I did lots of research first, as you said. Oh, interesting. Normally it's the other way around. Oh, interesting. Trina says, no signs of primary or secondary, excellent grade and behavior. My son was diagnosed when he started uni. Do you know what? That is the common challenge. A lot of women, for example, will not get diagnosed because they have amazing grades and great behavior, no support needed. Where boys, let's be honest, are a bit naughtier because of how they demonstrate it. So they're more likely to get diagnosed earlier. That's where the old myth came that people with ADHD can only be boys. It's only later that we said, actually, it could be men as well. It can also be girls. It can be women. It can be anyone. Again, says, can definitely see what you mean about seeing it in my children. One just has autism diagnosis and the other is in the process. It made me think about myself. It's hereditary, which means it does run in the family. It is predominantly genetic. I'm not saying there's a high likelihood that you very well may be, but whether or not you need to get support for it, that's a personal question. Just because you may have characteristics or something doesn't mean you definitely need to have adaptations for it. But being aware of it goes a long way. January this year, age 31, congrats. I think it really does help make life easier the more you know about your own brain. However, a diagnosis alone isn't good enough. This is why attending things like today can really help add a bit more context. Special needs assessment profile. Oh yes, thank you. Oh, Joanne says, what advice would you give for children who don't want any support, but as a parent, we are trying to look out for the best interests? 14, who wants a label? You're worried about social pressure with social media. There's a lot of stresses and pressures. I think while a diagnosis would definitely be beneficial at 14 because they will have access to more support, I totally understand why they wouldn't want it. My number one advice would be to reframe how they see it. Rather than seeing it as a deficit, see it as a difference with different abilities. Be more proactive. Don't say, hey, because you're struggling, you should have this diagnosis or disorder to get help. You think differently. Let's understand how your brain works and we can utilize it better. I'm not saying it's a quick process, but you have to change that mindset first. My next question is, what support have you had? Maybe you've never had any support, but this might be even support that you put in place for yourself. Have any of you had reasonable adjustments? Have any of you had equipment, software, adaptations? Have you put anything in place personally? Let me know. Okay, Janet, it explains a lot and has made me feel more validated and accepting of myself. I'm less apologetic now about my messiness. I do find a lot of people like having a diagnosis for that very reason. It puts your life in perspective. Rather than just saying, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm a cock-up, everything I do wrong, because it's not my fault. I have ADHD, and it means the way I think is different to how the rest of the world thinks. They haven't adapted or tailored their process to fit my mind. It can take a massive load off your shoulders and be very empowering. Oh, Belle, so this is my support attending today. That's good. We've got reasonable adjustments, breaks in work. Yep, breaks are really important. I wish I followed that a bit more. An educational health plan. We've got adjustments, one-to-one class assistance, none videos, disability students allowance, help with time blindness. Yeah. Oh, STEM toys. A lot of these seem to be things that you have personally put in place for yourselves. Other things could be is to make sure that your online system is well organized. It could be making sure you have a clean and tidy desk. My desk is a mess. It might be that you prefer to work at home rather than, say, in an office. It might be that you like having regular one-to-ones just to catch up with people. It could be that you like to have a bit more manual control over your surroundings. So dim the lights, change the heating. It might be that you like repeating a question multiple times in order to get a bit of clarity. Honestly, it could be anything. Movement breaks, extra time, getting to know the sessions, neuro passport enrolls. Yes, a passport is becoming more and more readily available. For those of you who do not know, it's you have a little booklet which will say how your brain works. Rather than having to re-explain it every single time you start a new job, you can just say, there you go, take a look at them. I will say though, while I love the idea of them, I think there's not much uniformity to them. Some are quite strength-based and others are still very negative. Can't get help from school until diagnosed. I would say that's like the whole chicken and the egg thing. You need to get a diagnosis from the school, but the school won't give you one until you're diagnosed. There's a reason why there's an old expression called autism mums, which you can apply to any neurodivergence. It's that you have to be an absolute warrior to get your child support early on. It shouldn't be that way. And unfortunately, it really depends on where you are in the country or in the world. Some schools have a lot of finances and a lot of money to spend. Others are completely strapped. So yeah, it really are not all created equally. Some support could include assistive technology. These are things like noise cancelling headphones, different apps that can help with mental focus, any sort of electronic gadget or gizmo. Then you could have special tuition. There are some things which the educational system does not set you up for success with. Maybe you need help with concentration, maybe you need help with memory, maybe with sensory stimulation. You could potentially need a note taker because our brains are notoriously terrible at multitasking. Saying, hey, rather than having to do writing and learning, just listen and someone else will do the writing. Even things like AI are becoming really useful for electronic note-taking. Maybe having one-to-one support or group support. They both have their pros and cons. Group support, you can relate to other people. One-to-one support, if you're a bit more introverted, you're more likely to get your voice heard. Kaylee says, neuro passports are something we are in the process of introducing in our team. and we don't meet the child/young person until the initial assessment for cognitive behavioral therapy, which we understand can be overwhelming. These are sent along a profile of us, like our therapy shows. Oh, yes, I do like that, where before you're going to meet someone, you have, hey, this is who you're going to meet. It can definitely reduce anxiety. Just like if I'm going to a new building that I've not been to before, I'll normally visit it maybe a day or a week before just to get used to my route before I go there on the day, because that can cause a lot of anxiety. Samira says, will the recording be sent? Absolutely. It will be on our YouTube when April's able to edit it. Joanne says, the funding schools receive for SEND students is for funding for the individual, or is it distributed throughout the school? Good question. It depends. It should be given to an individual, but normally is filtered through. I think there's an amount of discretion, but I don't know if there's an official answer for that or if it is case by case. Getting instructions written down is extremely helpful. The reason that is that what you hear isn't necessarily what they're saying. We interpret the world differently. When things are written down, it gets rid of that ambiguity and hopefully makes things a little bit more crystal clear. Let's look at exams. Exams are awful. You know what? I wasn't too bad at school, but I was terrible at exams. Why? They're a completely different kettle of fish. They do not represent what you spend 9 times out of 10 of your time doing in the education system. What does EAA stand for? If you have no idea, make it up. But if you do know, this is essential for when it comes to exams. A top tip is, or hit. It refers to extra time, rest breaks, or tech during exams. Vicky says, general SEND budget is for the school or for anything they need for any child. Anything given via EHCP should be specifically for that child. Thanks, Vicky. Appreciate that. All right, so what does EAA stand for? Electronic Arts? Yes, it's exams access arrangements. We also had additional exams. Essentially, before you go into an exam, you can have adjustments made, but you cannot ask for it last minute. When I was doing my master's, there was support available. Apparently, I always asked too late, and it just wasn't possible to put it in place. So you have to make sure that this is for early on in the game and not an afterthought. EAs may be available, and it's one of those things you have to ask, and you don't have to have a diagnosis in order to have adjustments in place. They do need to happen early. For example, if you're starting a course in September, you need to ask before you start, because no word of lie, it took me 3 modules during my master's to get an EAA before they even put one in place. By that point, I already had terrible grades, so not that helpful. Assessments may be needed. Sometimes they do not allow any Tom, Dick or Harry to have one of these assessments. Ideally they should, but sometimes you need to go via the Joint Council for Qualification. These are like the body which kind of oversees it. These will check what your normal way of working is and make sure that the exam process reflects that. For example, say you do not use a computer in your lessons, and then suddenly for your exam, you want a computer. No, because that doesn't seem fair to the other student. But let's say one of your reasonable adjustments is that you always use a computer because your handwriting is terrible, for example. Then that would be a very reasonable adjustment for your exams as well. They like to make sure there's a connection. If you know that you are going to need particular help in an exam situation, I would recommend starting to embed that in your day-to-day process. It normally makes it a lot easier to get that. So while there is like an old body for help in the UK, if you're doing an apprenticeship, it's unregulated and it really depends on each individual's exam body. Do your research. Amy says, but it's all retrospective. You have to prove that you're spending the money before you can receive the money. The school, that is. Yeah, the system's a little bit massively flawed. I'm curious to know, in an exam situation, what would you find most useful? All we need to do is rank these in terms of usefulness. Let's say having a quiet room would be super useful. Rank that 1 out of 5. If you think extra time, who needs it? 5 out of it. Quiet room. And I do think that can be really useful. Let's face it, in an exam situation, when you are stuck in a room and there's all that tapping, clicking, tick-tocking, how can anyone focus, let alone someone with ADHD? Having a room which is designated to quiet can be super helpful. That being said, they'd always used to stick me in a room with all the misbehavers that were even noisier than regular students. Thanks to refocus, maybe every now and then, you have this amount of time left. You should be on this question by now. Just keep the ball rolling. Rest breaks. Some exams are like 2 hours. And you have a break to refresh. It's been proven breaks just as short as 5 minutes can be enough to reinvigorate the brain. There's so many studies on how breaks massively improve cognitive functioning. Computer use of typing. I can see how that's not needed for everyone, depending on your case. Other things you can ask for is your questions in different formats. Maybe you can ask for noise cancelling headphones in certain stuff, particularly in chairs, which are comfier if you struggle with posture. You can also ask for your questions explained, so someone re-saying it in a different way to help with comprehension. Sometimes you can even make sure that you can do your exams with your voice, so it can be dictated either via Senko or by some computer that has special non-cheating software in place. You can also make sure you're in a room that is more sensory friendly, so it's not as echoey or has the right ambience. Maybe you might even be able to use a recorder in some instances. You can see the adjustments that you can have kind of vary. There'll be some that they use time and time again, but there'll be some that you have to ask. You don't ask, you don't get. Or we got extra time for inattention and time blindness. Yeah, the extra time I really needed. Normally they'll give you about 20 to 25% extra time, but that can be more depending on your overall needs. Bit weird, but became stressful exams are the problem, not minimal class of lectures. Yet the exam pressure can be really daunting. This is also perfectionism. I always used to give it an excellent answer for the first 2 questions on the paper, get halfway through. Yep, I'm with you on that. My first 2 questions, perfect. And then eventually I would just have to finish each question with a little smiley face or something. Simplified questions, yeah. Sometimes they are overly complicated and actually just need someone to reword it in a different format. As long as the help they are giving you isn't the help that you are being quizzed on, then why can't they give an alternative way? I notice I use many words for my son and he starts to check out. Yeah, it's true. It's why when you look at newspapers, they're actually written at for 7-year-olds because people don't like hard words. They want the information and they want it quick. Whereas when you're reading novels and books, you want that kind of more detail. Let's look at higher education. You're done with college and now you think, you know what? I want to take it to the next level. Maybe I want to go to university. Maybe I want to do a high-level apprenticeship. Can you get support when you're on the top of your game? Yes, but it's different. What are questions that as a student you feel that you should ask a potential university? For example, say you do higher education. How do you even pick a place which is going to be suited for you? I'll give you an example. Like when I was looking at doing higher education, there were some universities which were really high in the league tables. They were the creme de la creme of universities, and I probably could have got into them. However, their disability support or SEN support was terrible. I think a school which has better support structures is way better than a school that has a high league table. Do they actually have SEN support? More importantly, how many per student? If they have one SEN code for 100 students, you're not going to get a look in. Make sure they have a decent amount. What support is available for me? Do you need to have proof or do you get it automatically? Flexibility? Is it a one-size-fits-all approach or can it be tailored? What are they already doing for students for ADHD? Yeah, don't go with what they say will happen. Go with what is already happening. Are there support groups? Yeah, there might be different societies or groups that could help to support one-to-one. Not always. That's why it's worth checking. Support structures. Is there coaching? If I get oppressed by the environment, can I seek solace somewhere chill? Yeah. Are you able to just leave your lecture if it's getting overwhelming? How many students do they have with ADHD? If they have no data on that, that would be a bit concerning for me. If student support is actually accessible, or are they waiting lists for 2 weeks long? Yeah, that's another really good one. I remember when I wanted additional help, I would have to go on a waiting list. And by the time I finally got help, it was too late. Is there any disability services in university? Yeah, the campus layout. That is the campus all in one area or is it spread out? Do the lecturers actually know ADHD and do they have training on ADHD? Do you have ADHD specialist mentors? These are all really good questions, by the way. And I would definitely write them down and take them with you. Because if you're anything like me, you've got them in your head, but when it actually comes to it, you've lost them. On the flip side, we have apprentices that do not disclose disability diagnosis, the fear of not being offered a placement. Roxanne, you're true on that. Should you disclose? That is also another big question. There is still stigma around it. And if you disclose, you may be discriminated against. That's something that I can't promise you that you will not be. If you disclose and you get discriminated against, at least you have some protection legally, which you may struggle with if you don't disclose at all. Questions that I always ask is that, is assisted care allowed in exams? And is extra time given? If so, do I need to do anything for it or can I just get it? Typically, if you've had it in prior education, then you'll be allowed it in higher education. They normally like to just follow the status quo of what has already been done before. If you've never had any support, it may get a little bit more tricky. Exam adjustments, what are they willing to do? The deadlines, how much extra time can you get? And will it delay your graduation? My graduation is going to be a year after I finished my actual studies because I had different deadlines. It messed it up. You should be penalized for having adjustments. Study space that's quiet, one-to-one support, and a peer group. No one likes to feel that you're on this road alone. Other things you could ask for is time reminders, sensory considerations, maybe having areas which are not so bright. Maybe you are able to have stimming toys in your exam or classes where no one will mention it. Possible that they can always supply anything verbal in written format. It could also be that they have Allowance and reminders to help you. Interactive classes, so many different things. The big question is, can I actually get some funding for this? This is not just UK focused, this is England focused because honestly, funding is different wherever you go. But in England, at least, you can get some money and it's through the Disability Students Allowance. If this is your first time applying via university, you'll get it. A grant for essential costs. And basically, you should not have to pay any extra money to someone who isn't disabled in order to attend university. Let's say I would love to go, but I can't afford the software I need in order to study. That should never be a barrier and that should be paid for. If, however, you want something which puts you at an unfair advantage or could be used for multiple different things, that's when they normally say no. An example is they used to give laptops to everyone, high-end laptops. Now they'll say you could use that for watching Netflix. That could be seen as an unfair expense. If you have anything which is useful, but for a particular reason, that's quite easy to get funding for. Back to this question, do you need an official diagnostic? I've already mentioned it, but just as a refresh. And this was a difficult question to answer, right? Because if you ask the internet will typically say, no, you do need a diagnosis. And they're really firm on that. But it was 2019 in the UK when they decided actually it doesn't have to be as much of a requirement. For DSA, you need an official diagnosis. I would say it's mostly true. It makes it a lot easier. The government is a lot more strenuous. For instance, if you have a diagnosis that was before 16, you are now eligible. But if you have no diagnosis, good luck getting support. Basically, in most places in life, having a diagnosis isn't really essential. It's nice to have, but it's not essential. Whereas in education, it is essential in some instances. Yeah, I would probably say it's more true, to be honest, in this case. You're right, there might be some universities which are a bit more flexible, but not the ones that I've had experience with. Isa says, I want to get my 9-year-old daughter assessed, but she is a classic people pleaser who masks at school and is academically able. They just don't see it. I'm aware we need evidence of symptoms in more than one setting, but school input is often given way into just diagnosis. Has anyone else faced this and overcome this? It's a good point, and I think I would state that, are you aware that girls do demonstrate ADHD in different ways? Have you experienced diagnosed females before? Also, have you documented how her characteristics are displayed in different settings? You have to give a whole three-dimensional approach. All right, diagnostic reports need to be post-16. All right, that's what I just answered. That is false. It used to be, but no longer. If anyone says, oh, it's out of date, not true. If any of you went private for assessments, do know that not all assessments are respected by the NHS. You always want to make sure that if you go private for an assessment, that you're getting it from a very respected institution. And people argue why. Remember, ADHD is for life. You are born with it, you die with it. It changes over time, but it never goes away. Why would you need to get a new assessment? It's like when you're on disability benefits, you shouldn't have to have continuous reassessments because it isn't something that can be cured. It's something that just is. Loving the questions, by the way. If you do want an assessment, one place you could take a little look is the ADHD Foundation. But you do have to pay for these. They vary. They could be £400, £700. You can also go to places like Lexic or different private providers. While there are sometimes you can get financial support, chess is great, but it's slow. Private institutions are still quite slow, but not as slow. Universities can sometimes pay, workplaces can sometimes pay, but quite often it comes down to the individual. But I would really stress, if you do pay for one, make sure that it is accepted via the NHS. Because let's say you eventually one day you want medication for your ADHD, they have been known to say no for people who don't have a recognised official diagnosis. John says, do you know if funding either through schools or educational plans for secondary education could include an ADHD coach? They don't often have a definitive list. It's normally about justification. I think they could definitely get a specialist in learning disabilities, but would they give you a coach? I've not personally heard about it before, maybe in private schools, but I've not heard about it in public schools. My top tips is apply early. If any of you are looking to get some of that disability students allowance, apply early. It gets incredibly great. You don't first tell your university you have a disability or a learning difference, but if you do, it can help you in the long run. It's better to tell them before you need help rather than once you need help. Otherwise, it looks like you're making it up. It shouldn't look that way, but you know what people are like. If you want a private assessment, there are many places you can get them, but make sure that they are valid to where you hope to use them. I've seen many people that have spent hundreds of pounds and essentially it was useless. What is good to know? First of all, student finance will contact you if you are registered, whereas when you're in a working environment, you have to contact them. Normally, all your costs will be covered or support should be based on needs, not income. Forget about what family income you have. It's all about what needs you have. And the last bit I'm going to study today is a couple of skills that could help you. First of all is understanding how your memory works. If you're anything like me, my memory is like a goldfish. First of all, you have the sensory input. Then your memory will use it in a little bit. The more you use it, the more it's stronger and grows. Look at the model of memory. I can't go into it now, but I found it quite useful in understanding why I take so long to learn things and what I can do to improve it. Have there been any strategies that you have found in education that have worked for you? One thing that I use is cognitive behavioral therapy, which I haven't found overly useful, but I know some people do. This is when you ask yourself, what are you feeling? Why are you feeling? How does it affect you? It could be just taking breaks, to be honest. Ooh, what do we have here? Oh yeah, it's true that different locations will have different support. Chunking information, yeah, how you cut it up and distribute it. Try to remember things in images or pictures or narratives, which help glue them together. With exams, I found doing modular exams were much better than doing one big exam. Visual aids, written questions and instructions. Yep, absolutely. Some of my favorites include having reminders on my phone. I use a little Alexa device and it's always reminding me. Genuinely so useful to me. Having things broken up, regular breaks. I have things on my computer which actually say, have a break time. And it actually locks my computer, so I have to get off and have a break. There are ways around it, but it makes it more about it. Using different colors and charts, multi-sensual. I sometimes use gel pens that smell funny because it helps provoke certain memories. I have goals. I have places where I can use quiet study, sometimes a little jiggle or a wiggle. Oh, in school, I didn't realize that there was a difference between understanding something and remembering it. I would understand that was being taught, but didn't know how to remember it. One of the biggest flaws in our education systems, we are taught to remember things and not to understand things. We are taught how to accept a fish rather than how to fish for that fish. There is an absolute difference. I love science, but it's when it comes to remembering it is an area which I struggle with. And I find the way I obtain that is by teaching myself in a way which I know works for me, rather than trying to conform to their own previous idea. I remember those gel pens. So that is the support you can get in education. There may be more. These are the most popular ones. However, if you are in the workplace and you have now left the education system, you can get a workplace needs assessment, which means you can get one-to-one support. The best thing is, this is really simple. You can get one without having a diagnosis. If any of you are in employment and resonate with being neurodivergent, I highly encourage you to go on our website and essentially do this quick little form, and we can get you free support. It's definitely worth checking out. If you did find today useful and you want to learn more, you can go on our YouTube channel and you can look at all our lovely YouTube videos. We have a lot of them now. We have nearly 500 videos of lovely entertainment for you to check out. Do check out my lovely TED Talk. If I could ask you all for one favor, today was completely free and it cost you a penny, is that you go on mine and give it a like. I'm trying to get as many people as possible to watch this video and share it with schools far and wide, as it's an area I'm really passionate about. If you are able to click that link, give it a watch and a share, I'd be very appreciative. If you want to get in contact, go to our website and there's quizzes, games, workplace needs assessments. If you want to drop me an email personally, you're very welcome. You can add me on LinkedIn. I hope you found today useful, entertaining, and a couple of gems to go away with. Hi, Nat, do you know how the private assessments are recognised by the NHS? I don't. You trying to ask them, to be honest. But it's a good question. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Great having you all. And yeah, see you next week, hopefully. Bye.